Chapter 14 Silicon Alamo. Brother Jake stood behind the bar of the Horny Toad Cantina in Mesquite, mixing up another big fucking gun. 1 part Rumpelmitz, 1 part Midori, with a splash of blue Caraco. The BFG was a drink he connected in honor of his favorite weapon from Doom. It was the least he could do, considering the cantina was right across the highway from Id's office. The toxic green cocktail was the unofficial toast of Dallas, the new capital of the video game gold rush. By the summer of 1997, Dallas had become to gamers what Seattle was to musicians in the early 1990s. Id was Nirvana. In the 5 years since the two Johns had rolled into town with a Pac-Man machine in the back of their truck, the game developer community there had more than tripled. The growth extended to Austin, where just as many were popping up around Richard Garrett's flagship company, Origin. Time called the Texas gamers the New Cowboys. Wired called them Doom Babies. The Boston Globe dubbed the state video games renaissance the New Hollywood. A more appropriate name would have been Silicon Alamo. Because the crux of the rush was first-person shooters, between Doom, Quake, and Scott Miller's hit Duke Nukem 3D, shooters had spawned a multi-million-dollar cottage industry and dominated the video game charts. This fulfilled the dream that it had set out to accomplish back at SoftDisk, to make the PC a viable gaming platform. Of the $3.7 billion generated in 1996 from interactive entertainment software, nearly half, $1.7 billion, was from PC games alone. The PC gaming boom, declared USA Today, has helped the industry bounce back. With the prospects of Id's and Ion's fame and fortune, a new generation of companies were arising around Dallas. Rogue and Ritual spawned respectively from Id and 3D Realms, specialized in making so-called mission packs, add-on levels for Quake. Ensemble Studios, empowered by the addition of Id's Sandy Peterson, created one of the best-selling strategy games of all time, Age of Empires. Terminal Reality, founded by ex-Apogee members and the creator of Microsoft's groundbreaking flight simulator engine, devoted itself to a range of multi-platform gaming products. The Cyber Athlete Professional League was trying to turn live deathmatching events into the gaming version of the NFL. Id did so much to increase the community by licensing out its technology. In addition to Ion Storm, other companies were now paying close to $250,000, as well as royalties, to use the Quake engine. Though Id would profit from some of its competition, there was more on the rise. Soon, the gaming press began speculating about the Quake killers that would, or could, knock Id from its perch. Duke Nukem 3D had already received much acclaim. Valve, a Seattle-based company founded by some former Microsoft employees, had licensed the Quake engine to make Half-Life, a game that had previewed at E3 to a favorable response. Unreal, a shooter created by Epic, the North Carolina company discovered by Scott Miller years before, had demoed as well to laudable reviews. Then, of course, there was Daikatana. With all these games due sometime over the next year, as well as Id's own Quake 2, the Silicon Alamo Showdown promised to be one of the best shootouts in years. If only those involved could survive the battles brewing in their own companies. The race was on. Carmack was behind the wheel of his Ferrari F40, burning down the drag strip as the Porsche 911 stormed up behind him. It was a bright sunny day in Ennis, Texas. Carmack had decided to rent out this country racetrack for a little company competition. It was a fun way for everyone to flex their power of the sports cars the games had afforded them. This wasn't the only track they had been visiting of late. In a pinch, Carmack had once called the mayor of Mesquite and asked him if he would be shut down the local airport long enough for the company to have a few little drag races. The mayor was happy to oblige. Carmack, after all, had donated tens of thousands of dollars of equipment, including bulletproof vests, which some gamer on the force stitched with doom patches, to the local police. He deserved consideration. The drag races weren't the only contests in town. Though Quake 2 was the favorite shooter at E3, the pressure inside id was mounting. Carmack had absolved himself of his competitive mood manipulation test, determining that such motivation didn't suit his circuitry. But the rest of the guys were hardly resigned. Other company shooters, even id's own licensees, became regular subjects of ridicule. When the first demo of Half-Life came through the doors, many insisted it would do nothing less than fail. The company, like Quake 2, had grown militaristic and serious. For some, all the fun and humor seemed to have been sucked out of id, not just figuratively, but literally, with the most fun people, Romero, Mike, Jay, Sean, all out the door. In place was real-life competition that had begun against Romero and now spread amongst themselves. American and others blamed Carmack, who sequestered himself in his office, for passive-aggressively encouraging the conflict. One of the main sources of distrust among the employees was id's competitive bonus structure. Every quarter or so, the owners would meet to assign a dollar amount to each employee. They would then split up a bonus payment based on those decisions. One quarter, someone might get $100,000. The next, $20,000. The owners admitted that it was arbitrary and imperfect plan, but it was the only one they could surmise. As a result, the employees realized that the easiest way to get higher bonuses was to outwit, outplay, and outsmart each other. It was a business deathmatch. With Romero out of the picture, the competition had only grown more fierce. Though American had been the golden boy during the early days of Quake, those days were over. Carmack had turned cold, American thought, making him feel like he was never sure if they were really friends. For Carmack, American was just another casualty of self. Someone with talent who'd lost his drive and focus, like Romero. As a result, Tim Willits, American's old adversary, swiftly moved into favor, triggering rampant infighting. More and more, Carmack wanted to grab his laptop and disappear into a hotel room in some strange state. All he wanted to do was code. That was all he ever wanted. The problems at id, he thought, were precisely the kinds of problems they could avoid by keeping the company small, the team tight. For any given project, he posted in his .plan file online, there is some team size beyond which adding more people will actually cause things to take longer. This is due to loss of efficiency from chopping up problems, communication overhead, and just plain entropy. It's even easier to reduce quality by adding people. I contend that the max programming team size for id is very small. With Romero gone, Carmack's life could aspire to the elegance of his code. Simple, efficient, lean. This was how he would lead his company. This was how he would make his games. He would not succumb to internal pressures or grand aspirations. That would lead to infinite delays. He would deliver. And on December 9th, 1997, he did just that. Oh my God, Quake 2 is the most impressive game I've ever played on a computer. What game have you played lately that was better than Quake 2? I predict the answer is none. Among the most gushing reviews, and there were many, of Quake 2 was this one from Romero. He posted it on December 11th in his .plan file 2 days after the game was released. Romero had burned through non-stop for 48 hours, completing the entire game in one long twitch. He had reason to be excited. By licensing the Quake 2 engine, Romero was assured that he could implement all the tricks of the game, including colored lighting, in Daikatana. Not only was he making what he thought was the most ambitious shooter ever created, but he would be able to do it using the most ambitious engine ever created. It was finally like the ultimate collaboration, a marriage of technology and design that Romero could never achieve at id. And now, best of all, no one, not even Carmack, not anyone, could get in his way. Or so he thought. The burgeoning troops of Ion Storm were grumbling with discontent. It had begun when Ion released the Bitch Ad in April. Just as that backlash was stinging, the company went to E3 in June 1997 with what many thought to be a shabby demo of Daikatana. Romero seemed more interested in playing games and courting the press, they thought, than in telling them what they needed to do to realize his game. And the game, as a result, was feeling further and further from completion. Unlike Romero, most of his staff didn't like the idea of switching Daikatana to the Quake 2 technology. In fact, they hated it. Romero seemed to have no idea how much work it was going to take just to implement the bare essentials of his 400-page Daikatana design document. He wanted 64 monsters, 4 time zones, a game 4 times the size of Quake. They'd have trouble meeting the new March 1998 deadline without the pressure of switching technologies. Now, how are they going to handle this? They weren't the only ones with suspicions after E3. Eidos was not pleased to find out that Ion Storm's flagship title was now going to miss the Christmas season. But the Eidos executives were willing to give Romero the benefit of the doubt. Romero assured them, as he assured his staff, that the game would be pushed back only a few months. Bodies plus manpower, he said, was going to be the formula of success. The company already had 80 people, and it was still growing. With all those people at work, of course the work would get complicated. Just look at what we did at id with barely 13 guys. Eidos had no choice but to take his word, since he was managing the development of the game without intervention on their part. For all they knew, the game really was just a few months from hitting the shelves, and they were willing to do whatever it took to help make that happen. What that took was money. After less than a year, Eidos' original $13 million deal, which was supposed to fund all 3 games, was starting to dwindle away. 80 people on staff meant 80 salaries, and with 2 computers per person, 160 state-of-the-art machines with 21-inch monitors. The office renovations were now approaching the $2 million mark. In all, there was no end in sight. Something had to be done. Mike Wilson, Ion's marketing whiz, had a plan. Ever since his days at id, Mike had dreamed of running his own publishing company, and he'd made this dream clear to Romero and the other owners of Ion the moment he came on board. They even nicknamed the plan Ion Strike, which would be the self-publishing wing they'd start once they finished their obligation to Eidos. Mike couldn't believe that Romero, unbeknownst to him, had signed not a 3-game deal with Eidos, as he's expected, but a deal that gave them the option on 3 more. This meant that Ion received $13 million for its first 3 games, and when presented with the next 3 game ideas, Eidos could decide whether to fund them as well. The faster they burned through the options, the faster they'd get their cash and be on their way to Ion Strike. The time now was to burn. The first deal made to cash in on this plan was to acquire Dominion, which Todd Porter had begun at 7th level. The game was languishing at Todd's former company, and he convinced the other owners that it was the perfect fit for Ion, that they could simply buy it for $1.8 million, and it would take him only 6 weeks or so to get it out the door. Then, he'd finish the game he was originally planning to do, Doppelganger. They made the deal, but it was only the beginning. In September 1997, Romero had heard through the grapevine that a game designer named Warren Spector was looking for somewhere to go. At 41 years old, Warren was a well-regarded veteran of the industry. The son of a dentist and reading teacher in New York, he had grown up an intellectual and academic. While pursuing a doctorate in radio, television, and film at the University of Texas at Austin in the late 1970s, Warren fell in with the town's burgeoning community of science fiction authors and gamers, eventually taking a job with Richard Garrett's company, Origin. Games, for him, were not just diversions. They were the closest thing to artificial reality. There's never been a medium in the history of mankind that can literally put you in another world, he said. We're stuck here. But with the right balance of story and technology, a good game can get close. This is the only medium ever that's let ordinary people travel to other worlds. I am never going to fly a World War I biplane. I am never going to visit a space station. I'm never going to be a super spy. But when I play one of these games, I am. As id popularized what he thought were mindless first-person shooters, Warren worked on more literary first-person games, which he termed immersive simulations. Titles like Ultima Underworld, Thief, and System Shock relied more on a player's intellect and stealth than on the trigger finger. Romero thought he'd be a perfect fit. Warren signed on to head up his own development team in what would become Ion Austin. He set to work on an idea for his own dream product, a sci-fi counter-terrorist game that would be a more realistic and gripping immersion simulation. The title was Deus Ex. When Romero's public relations company tried to pull Warren into the fray, however, he was quick to draw a line in the sand. I will never say the words, "suck it down," he told them, and I don't want to make anybody my bitch. We're going to be the classy part of this company. Just get ready for it. Mike Wilson was less than concerned about how he himself was coming off. At a video game industry trade show in England in September, he called a meeting with the executives at Videos and presented them with an outline of Ion Storm's next 3 games. Here they are, he said. Take them or leave them. Mike had squeezed publishers in the past, particularly with the Quake shareware deal that essentially cut out GTI and the retailers. The Eidos executives didn't even discuss the plan. Who the hell did Mike think he was? Ion Storm was already behind on their first 3 titles, and now they wanted to talk about their next 3? No deal was struck. Todd Porter told the other owners that after the meeting he received a call from the Eidos CEO threatening to strangle Mike. Todd, who had long been against the idea of burning through the Eidos options, complained to Romero and Tom, but to no avail. They were too immersed in their games, he thought, to tend the store. So he decided to tend it himself. He didn't like what he found. Mike and the chief operating officer, Bob Wright, he thought were recklessly spending cash without keeping clear tabs. But while Todd was moving in against them, Mike was taking similar steps against Todd. Easygoing and fun-loving, Mike had quickly become something of a mentor to the young gamers at Ion Storm, and they were opening up to him about their increased dismay. Todd and his Dominion team were a pain in the ass, they said. So were Jerry's artists. A culture clash was emerging. While Romero's team was composed of young gamers from the Doom community, Todd's and Jerry's team were older and more removed. Todd had hired a few PhDs. Few of Romero's gamers had even graduated from college. Worse, Todd's guys didn't know the game that had made Ion Storm possible. Romero's crew was shocked that a guy from Todd's team didn't even recognize Doom when it was being played on someone's machine. After hearing these complaints daily, Mike decided something had to be done. In October, he took Romero and Tom to a bar and told him the things that their own staffs had been afraid to say. Everyone hated Todd. Dominion, despite his assurances, was taking longer than 6 weeks and wasn't looking too impressive. Todd didn't fit in with the company. He was wearing business suits to work, for Christ's sake. They agreed to let Todd go. The next week, on the elevator to tell Todd the news, however, Romero backed down. "Man, I can't do it," he told Mike. "I don't feel like we've given him a chance, and we're just firing because everybody hates him. We should just talk to him and lay down some ultimatums and offer to help him." Mike was shocked. Romero had flipped his bit again. But Mike didn't realize just what the implications of that flip would mean. The next month, Mike was called into a meeting himself. The owners, particularly Todd, had had enough with him. Eidos was calling every day and saying how much they couldn't stand working with him. And they had discovered some problems. Without the owner's knowledge, Wilson had borrowed company money to buy a new BMW. Furthermore, the self-publishing deal was just too out of focus. Ion Storm didn't need to publish games, Romero said. It needed to make games. And if Mike was dead set on being a publisher, then Mike would have to go. He went. With Mike out of the picture, Romero could buckle down and lead his team to the completion of a task at hand. By February 1998, he got what he'd been waiting for, the Quake 2 code. It was the stuff that would enable them to put the completion of Daikatana into high gear. But when Romero opened the file, he took one look at the code and froze. Oh my God, he thought. What had Carmack done? "Do you have some aspirin?" Carmack asked his friend as they walked into a casino in Las Vegas. "Do you have a headache?" "No," Carmack said, "but I will soon." It was February 8th, 1998, and Carmack was about to put his brain to the test, counting cards in blackjack. This had become something of a new fascination of his. Having a reasonable grounding in statistics and probability, and no belief in luck, fate, karma, or gods. The only casino game that interests me is blackjack, he wrote in a dot plan file. Playing blackjack probably is a test of personal discipline. It takes a small amount of skill to know the right plays and count the cards. But the hard part is making yourself consistently behave like a robot, rather than succumbing to your gut instincts. To refine his skills before the trip, Carmack applied his usual learning approach, consuming a few books on the subject and composing a computer program. In this case, one that simulated the statistics of blackjack dealt cards. His research proved successful, netting him $20,000, which he donated to the Free Software Foundation, an organization of like-minded believers in hacker ethic. "It's not like I'm trying to make a living at blackjack," Carmack wrote online after his trip, "so the chance of getting kicked out doesn't bother me too much." It didn't take long for him to find out just how he'd feel. On the next trip, Carmack was approached by 3 men in dark suits who said, "We'd appreciate it if you play any other game than blackjack." The others at the table watched in disbelief. "Why are they doing this to you?" a woman asked. "They think that I'm counting cards," Carmack said. "They think you can remember all of those different cards?" "Yeah," Carmack replied. "Something like that." "Well, what do you do?" "I'm a computer programmer," he said as he was escorted out the door. Casinos weren't the only places Carmack sought escape. In February 1998, his old desire for monkish seclusion brought him rather spontaneously one day to a small, anonymous hotel room somewhere in Florida. Despite the glowing reviews and great sales of Quake 2, the stress of the office had finally proven too great. All the infighting, the bitching, the moaning, the real-life death matches between increasingly dissatisfied staff. Things had gotten so bad that they even worked their way into the game. A secret level created by Tim Willits contained portraits of each id member on the wall. Each portrait triggered some type of animation that, in Tim's mind, reflected the personality of the staffer. Carmack disappeared into the floor when anyone approached. Now, Carmack had vanished for real, sequestering himself in this faraway hotel room for a week. Pizza boxes littered the floor. The phone didn't ring. The door didn't open. The only distraction was when his throat dried out so much that he had to venture outside for another Diet Coke. He'd even bought a special laptop for the occasion. A Dolce portable Pentium 2 system with full-length PCI slots. Just roomy enough for his Evans and Sutherland OpenGL accelerator. Ostensibly, he had come here to research what he was calling his Trinity engine, a new leap of graphics systems that he would help develop while the rest of the team churned out a mission pack for Quake 2. But when he arrived back in Mesquite the next week, he found himself as well with an uncommon need to reflect in a .plan file he posted online. Name: John Carmack. Description: Programmer. Project: Quake 2. Last updated: 02/1998, 03/06, 55 seconds, Central Standard Time. Okay, I'm overdue for an update. The research getaway went well. In the space of a week, I only left my hotel to buy Diet Coke. It seems to have spoiled me a bit. The little distraction in the office grate on me a bit more since. I will likely make week-long research excursions a fairly regular thing during non-crunch time. Once a quarter sounds about right. I'm not ready to talk specifically about what I am working on for Trinity. Quake went through many false starts, beam trees, portals, etc., before settling down on its final architecture. So I know that the odds are good that what I am doing now won't actually be used in the final product, and I don't want to mention anything that could be taken as implied promise by some people. I'm very excited by all the prospects, though. Many game developers are in it only for the final product, and the process is just what they have to go through to get there. I respect that, but my motivation is a bit different. For me, while I do take a lot of pride in shipping a great product, the achievements along the way are more memorable. I don't remember any of our older product releases, but I remember the important insights all the way back to using CRT-C wraparound for infinite smooth scrolling in Keen. Actually, all the way back to understanding the virtues of structures over parallel arrays in Apple II assembly language. Knowledge builds on knowledge. I wind up categorizing periods of my life by how rich my learning experiences were at that time. My basic skills built up during school on Apple II computers, but lack of resources limited how far and fast I could go. The situation is so much better for programmers today. A cheap used PC, a Linux CD, and an internet account, and you'll have all the tools and resources necessary to work your way to any level of programming skill you want to shoot for. My first 6 months at SoftDisk working on the PC was an incredible learning experience. For the first time, I was around a couple of programmers with more experience than I had. Romero and Lane Roth. There were a lot of books and materials available, and I could devote my full and undivided attention to programming. I had a great time. The 2 years following, culminating in Doom and the various video game console work I did, was a steady increase in skills and knowledge along several fronts. More graphics, networking, Unix, compiler writing, cross-development, RISC architectures, etc. The first year of Quake's development was awesome. I got to try so many new things, and I had Michael Abrash as my sounding board. It would probably surprise many classically trained graphics programmers how little I knew about conventional 3D when I wrote Doom Hell. I had problems properly clipping wall polygons, which is why all the polar coordinates nonsense came from. Quake forced me to learn things right, as well as find some new innovations. The last 6 months of Quake's development was mostly pain and suffering trying to get the damn thing finished. It was all worth it in the end, but I don't look back at it on all that fondly. The development cycle of Quake 2 had some moderate learning experiences for me. GL Quake, Quake World, Radiosity, OpenGL Tool, programming, Win32, etc. But it also gave my mind time to sift through a lot of the things before getting ready to really push ahead. I think that the upcoming development cycle for Trinity is going to be at least as rewarding as Quake's was. I am researching deep levels of understanding on some topics, and I am branching out onto several completely new, non-graphic, areas for me. That should cross-pollinate well with everything else I am doing. There should also be a killer game at the end of it. Smiley face. The good mood didn't last. Like Romero and Ion Storm, Carmack was discovering that the glory days of a small team and easy chemistry were gone. In their place was a palpable atmosphere of bitterness and dysfunction. The tension between Tim, American, and the other level designers had reached a boiling point. Adrian and Kevin were battling with Paul Steed. They disliked each other too strongly to work closely together on the mission pack, Carmack realized. The solution? Build the next game around the company's animosity. Quake 3 would be a deathmatch-only title, using most of his ideas for Trinity engine. That would allow the map designers to work in complete isolation from each other. Carmack's idea did not go over well. Adrian was vocally upset with yet another Marines and shotgun shoot-'em-up game. He felt like they had been making the same title for years, and he wanted something different. So did American. Paul agreed, lobbying to do a title that had more of a story, more characters, more freshness. He drafted a long design document detailing a story for the game. Carmack shot it down, saying that story was not important. Even Kevin, long the ultimate team player of the group, expressed his dismay, telling Carmack that if he wanted to do this game, he'd have to find a different project manager. This was Carmack's company now more than ever. Quake 3 would be Carmack's game. For American, it was the beginning of the end. He was called into a meeting with the owners and told that he was being fired for not performing. Carmack thought American had served his purpose, but had now gone the road of Romero. When American wanted more of an explanation, he was told ultimately that it was because no one liked him. Typical, he thought. It was indicative of what the company had become since Romero left. There was no balance anymore. He wasn't the only one feeling newfound empathy for Romero. Even though Paul Steed had never worked with him, he was beginning to think that firing Romero had been a terrible mistake. Romero is chaos, and Carmack is order, he said. Together, they made the ultimate mix, but when you take them away from each other, what's left? The emerald green elevator doors slid open on the penthouse of the Texas Commerce Building in February 1998. Romero stepped out to see at last the completed renovation of his Willy Wonka factory. Everything he had imagined was there. The game room with the vintage arcade machines, the foosball pool table, a deathmatch arena with shiny 21-inch monitors wrapped around a fine oak kiosk, a bank of 12 television sets flashing MTV, a maze of corrugated steel cubicles that resembled a level of a game, a kitchen overflowing with candy and junk food, and wrapping around and on top of the 22,500 square feet, windows that scraped the clouds. Romero took it all in and had one thought. Holy shit, we gotta fucking make some great games. They needed to make great games because the expenses, Romero knew, were even greater. The office renovations had cost over $2.5 million. Dominion, which was supposed to have taken only 6 weeks to complete, had eaten up more than $3 million. The original $13 million was gone, and Eidos was now sending in cash on a monthly run rate. Between the lease, the salaries for nearly 100 employees, and the other expenses, The bills were nearly $1.2 million per month. But there was another problem. A big problem. Carmack's Quake 2 code. The engine was completely different than what he had expected. All this time he had his programmers preparing Daikatana in a way that would make it easy to switch over to what he assumed Carmack's new engine would require. But it turned out that Carmack had trashed its expected direction and instead produced a structure of code that caught Romero completely by surprise. It certainly wasn't done to dupe Romero into a delay. It was just Carmack making his own idiosyncratic intuitive leap. A leap that, once again, cramped Romero's grand designs. "This is going to take a while," Romero told Idios and his staff. "This code is jacked." Completing Daikatana for his promised 1998 deadline was impossible, but Romero thought they could turn it around in a few months. Others weren't so confident, lobbying him to forget about completing with its technology and just release the game using the original Quake engine. "You can't keep up with Carmack," said Romero's lead programmer, "so why even try?" But Romero wouldn't waver. His ambitions only grew larger. Later that month, Romero told the gaming press that Ion Storm was going to begin work on Daikatana 2. Co-owners Todd Porter and Jerry O'Flaherty initiated a plan of their own to launch a comic book division within the company using the artists of Jerry's who had worked in that industry. The owners approved the plan to hire up a staff and release a comic book for each of the company's games as essentially free public relations. When Idios got wind of the plan, however, they immediately shut it down. "You guys are supposed to be making games," they said. "Why should we pay you to make comics?" Even the glass ceiling they toiled beneath became a problem, specifically a nightmare of light. Next to vampires, no one hates the light as much as gamers. There's nothing worse than a big bad glare blinding down on a computer screen. Nobody could work. The architects were immediately called in to install stylish spoilers on top of the cubicles, but they proved hardly dark enough to suit the gamers' finicky tastes. Instead, they caravanned to Home Depot and returned on a mission. They whipped out the staple guns and fastened thick sheets of black felt over every cube in the office. They didn't just work in the shade, they worked in the black. To get into their cubes, they had to part their drapes of felt like photographers entering miniature darkrooms. It became an awesome and ironic sight. Walk through the glass dome of Gamer's Paradise, and all one saw were rows of caves. By the spring of 1998, the mood around the company was growing similarly black. Despite their working in what felt like perpetual crunch mode, 12 hours a day, 6 days a week, Daikatana was nowhere near being done. Many felt the project was out of control. One guy produced a series of levels that proved unusable. An artist created a graphical icon for an arrow in the game that was 1,000 times the appropriate size. Factions within the Daikatana team began breaking apart. Even Romero's most devout fans, Will Lecanto, Sphere, Kevro, and about half a dozen others, began getting more clandestine, opting out of rambunctious death matches and keeping to themselves. Others started lashing out. One employee was found alone at his desk, screaming. Romero fired him. But more were concerned about Todd Porter and Jerry O'Flaherty's increased sense of ownership. The two, they felt, were running the company into the ground. Todd had been showing up more frequently at Daikatana meetings, making what they thought were fruitless suggestions about how to alter the game. Meanwhile, Dominion was a shambles. To their minds, a sorry-looking title that was unfortunately going to be Ion Storm's first release. They soon took action. On May 13th, Sphere, Will, and 6 other team members of Romero's team asked Bob Wright, Ion's chief operating officer, whom they had perceived as an ally back when he was working closely with Mike Wilson, to join them for lunch. They had an ultimatum for Romero, they said. Todd and Jerry had to go, or they would walk out the door. Bob urged them to put their complaints in writing. Word about the meeting leaked back to Tom Hall. Bob had told the guys that he could help them to finance their own company if they did quit or got fired. Tom called Romero. It was bad timing. Romero was out of the office with his wife, Beth, who had just given birth to their first child, Lilia. He had been on something of a roll in his family life, having convinced his ex-wife, Kelly, to move with his boys, Stephen and Michael, to Texas so he could see his sons more often. Before long, he was right there by their side, playing games. The birth of his daughter was supposed to be a joyous day, but there was another fate in store. "What the fuck?" Romero screamed when Tom told him about Bob's interference. "That's it. Bob fucked with my team. He's gone." Bob was fired the next week, but this didn't begin to quell Ion's burgeoning problems. The company once again had a disappointing show at E3, which took place last week of May. Competing shooters such as the recently released Unreal and the upcoming Half-Life garnered most of the attention, as did id's upcoming game, Quake 3. When Ion Storm Dominion hit shelves the following week, it flopped. Another fantasy-based strategy game, StarCraft, had been released to rave reviews just a couple of months before, and made Todd's title look stale. Not only did it die in the marketplace, but it confirmed the already bitter gaming community that all might not be well in Romero's Dream Factory. And that community, the very people who had grown up on Romero's games, bit back. On game sites with names such as Evil Avatar, Sugar Shack, Blues News, and Daily Radar, players had a feeding frenzy around Ion Storm. "All talk, no game," a typical post read. "Reasons I won't buy Daikatana," read another. A comic strip online lampooned Romero with long hair saying, "Hi, I'm here to tell you that Daikatana will be great. You guys know I'm good for it, like Doom. You remember Doom? I did that. And Quake, right? That was me too. Design is law." The final frame showed that Romero was, in fact, pitching a hot dog seller to get a free meal. "Nice try, John," the vendor replied. "No game, no wiener." Another death rumor surfaced. This time it came after a photo of Romero in a morgue with a bullet hole in his head leaked onto the web. Gamers joked that he killed himself after losing a Quake game to Carmack. But when a gaming magazine online issued, and later retracted, a report that sources at Ion Storm confirmed Romero's demise, gamers went ballistic. Still reeling from the bitch ad, they resented what seemed to be another publicity stunt. Despite the fact that the leaked photo had actually come from an upcoming Texas Monthly magazine article about Ion Storm. The biggest blow came on September 30th, when a scribe named Bitch X posted on a site called Gaming Insider broke news of a plan by Eidos to buy Ion Storm. For months now, the owners had been in talks with their publishers to hatch some kind of bailout plan. The idea had started back in May, with Eidos buying 19% of Ion Storm's equity for $12.5 million, in exchange for forgiving the $15 million advance. Ion's royalty would be lowered from 40% to 25% as well. Bob Wright would even sue the company, alleging that they'd fired him specifically to cut him out of the profiting from the Eidos deal. Months later, the deal was still being negotiated. How Bitch X knew, no one could surmise. When, over the next couple of weeks, the bitch talked of various firings and emails at Ion Storm. The guy who ran Ion Storm's website told the owners, "Either people who are no longer with the company know a whole lot more than the people who are here, or we've got a leak that the Titanic can sail through." No one admitted to leaking the news, so Romero tried unsuccessfully tracing employees' email activity to see who might be sending information to the sites in question. But the damage was done. the company grew rife with suspicion and distrust. The employees began to grumble quite loudly about Ion Storm's financial future. From the beginning, they had been expected to be cut in to some kind of royalty or bonus or ownership. And the more rumors spread, the more depression set in. Romero confronted his lead programmer, Key Kimbrell, who had co-founded Duango, one day for playing too many games and not getting his work done, a complaint whose irony didn't go unnoticed. "What the fuck, dude?" Romero said. "You stopped working, and we need to get this game done. It's serious, you know?" Key told Romero he was worried about the business. He had seen a spreadsheet of Ion Storm's financials and had been hearing rumors that Eidos was going to shut the company down. Romero exploded. "Rumor, rumor, 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 rumor bullshit," he said. "You don't understand business. Don't try to fuck with business stuff. You don't understand the deal we have with Eidos. You don't understand a lot of things. You're letting it affect the way that you are not working, and you're bringing other people down, and all this shit." But Key wouldn't back down, and Romero fired him on the spot. It would get worse. Employees began walking out the door, not to return. The deal with Eidos fell apart just as it was about to be signed, due, in no small part, in the increased delays and chaos within the glass walls. With the failure of Dominion and the need to keep Ion afloat, Todd relinquished plans to work on Doppelganger and immerse himself in his new position as CEO. Romero, he thought, was too non-confrontational, so Todd hired an auditing firm to make sense of Ion's hemorrhaging financials. Despite knowing that his own aggressive style could alienate those around him, he felt obliged to get the Daikatana team back into shape. But it was to no avail. Romero refused his suggestions to cut the game, and the employees only became more embittered at Todd's increasingly vocal lashings. They resented the fact that one day, while they watched a building go down in flames nearby from their perch, Todd exclaimed, "We're not paying you to watch a building burn." By the fall, Ion was heading for the conflagration of its own. On the evening of November 18th, Romero was taken out to P.F. Chang's for dinner by Stevie Case and a couple of other trusted employees. Since Stevie was hired, she had remained loyal to Romero, providing solace and perspective during the increasingly hard times. "We heard a rumor," she said, "that your entire Daikatana team is going to leave tomorrow." Romero remained defiant. "Fuck them if they're going to leave," he said. The next day, Romero and Tom were called into the conference room, where they found the Daikatana team waiting. "We can't keep working under these conditions," they were told by Will Loconto. "We don't think this game is ever going to get done, so we're going to go and start our own company." Romero wandered back through the maze of cubicles and sat down on his desk, where he would remain long after the sun came down on the glass tower. "Everything is bullshit," he thought. "Why did I hire these people? It shouldn't have been this big. This was too many people, too much money. It should have just been me and Tom and a small team of people with a common goal. It should have been like the way it was when we weren't biz guys. We were just gamers."